Welcome back, everybody, to the Run the Sims PGA show. I'm your host, Drew, also known as Red Kachik. And this week is the Bank of Utah Championship, otherwise known as the Black Desert Championship. So we are going to be taking a look. Let's see here. Clean up the background. We'll look at the golf course, same as last couple weeks ago now with the fall swing. And got news today: the Century Tournament Champions was canceled. That's the first event in January, so that's unfortunate. First event will be Sony now in Hawaii. But tonight we're going to probably talk a little bit about projection distributions. With the Japan lock being at like 7 p.m. Eastern due to the tsunami or whatever was happening then in Japan, typhoon, whatever. I did want to bring up the distributions for the no cut just to compare to the cut distributions. And then obviously we'll dive into Run the Sims, and I built some groups or some lineups already, and we'll run some Sims and see who's popping. Ran a couple different builds with different allocations. So we'll get a good look at what we have going this week for the players. Not one of the strongest fields, obviously. The fall swing just is what it is. But we will definitely dive into the golf course and some Sims and some projection distributions, just as an example. So with that being said, we can go ahead and dive in. Let's do this one. All right. So this week is the Bank of Utah Championship, played at the Black Desert Resort. This is the second year they've hosted this event. It is in Utah. I think it's called Ivins, Utah, at 3,000 feet of elevation. So definitely elevation is a factor. To par 71, 7,371 yards. I actually think this year they lengthened it like 50 yards, 40 yards. It's like 74-15, something like that. But again, it's at elevation of 3,100 feet, I think it is, which equates to about 7,150. So all in all, this is about a standard PGA Tour golf course. I think most people look at this and think 7,400 yards, par 71 is on the longer side, and it is on the scorecard. We'll look at some of the hole-by-hole stuff. There's some par fours over 500 yards, some really short par fives, though. But all in all, it's a relatively standard PGA Tour setup as far as distance goes for a par 71. We'll look through a couple of the characteristics really quickly and look at some top guys that are kind of popping statistically. And then obviously we'll rely on the Sims and the projections that incorporate most of those anyways. The other thing I did want to mention about the elevation is it doesn't really apply so much in baseball necessarily. There's a lot more side spin and backspin in golf, hitting a golf ball. But these fairways are extremely wide, and at elevation, it actually reduces the spin a little bit. So you'll see, as you can see down here, driving accuracy at 81%, which is 22% higher than the PGA Tour average. Like there's just massive amounts of room for driving the golf ball here. And obviously at elevation, that helps reduce the spin. But even without that, these fairways are enormous. Outside the fairways, it's a little bit of rough and then basically lava, rocks. It's desert. You don't want to go into it. So you can see there driving accuracy at 81.6, driving distance at 312, which is 12 yards over the PGA Tour average. So again, that goes into in line with the elevation. It's a longer golf course. Guys can hit driver, also hit a lot of fairways. You don't see that. I mean, 81.6% is extremely high, especially considering they are hitting a lot of drivers. It's like typically inversed. Guys hitting a lot of drivers, driving accuracy is going to be like 50%, maybe less. So very easy to hit fairways. Driving is really not a predominant factor for me this week. Let's see. Last year, Matt McCarty, this was like his second PGA Tour event coming off the Korn Ferry Tour. He won at -23. The field average was about 2 strokes under par per round. Again, very important things. Those are all incorporated into the projections for birdies and scoring. But important to note, obviously, 2 under par field average versus playing a U.S. Open +2 field average per round. has very, very different scoring opportunities, obviously. For the correlations, there's really just 4 that stood out really highly. Again, we have 1 year of data, so take that for what it's worth. We have the IQ stat was number 1, greens in regulation number 2, strokes gained off the tee was number 3, which was interesting to see, and then strokes gained tee to green. So I think the last couple of events we saw strokes gained total at the very top. This week, there's a little bit more emphasis on IQ stat is like a mix of green regulation, proximity, and good driving. So it's just an overall ball striking stat. Honestly, IQ stat, there's a lot more into it, but I would kind of, if you want to picture what strokes gained tee to green does, IQ stat kind of does the same thing. For them to be correlated is certainly true. Greens and regulation, pretty basic. And then strokes gained off the tee. You can see everything else is a big drop off. And then strokes gained putting was actually negative. And a lot of that, again, just one event we have sample size for. The winner, Matt McCarty, lost, I don't know, a couple strokes putting the event immediately prior to this. So he only had one event leading in. And then a lot of the other guys at the top of the leaderboard didn't really have great putting stats heading this way. But all in all, nothing really crazy, kind of basics in terms of ball striking stats to look at. Nothing really of a niche stat, I guess, that you would want to look for. These are the driving distance distributions. So as you know, being a longer golf course, 290 to 310, 310 to 330, a lot of longer drives on this golf course. And you can also see the approach distance distribution. So I don't want to spend too much time going through the stats necessarily. You can spend all the time you want looking through this and figuring out what angles. Like I know people would want to look through some of the approach buckets. This is pretty linear from, not a ton of wedges. There's a few more, wedges, mid irons, a few more mid irons, long irons, long irons, long irons. So like it's very linear in how this course sets up for approaches. This was the Matt McCarty's lead-in form, again, 4 rounds because he had one event prior. So all in all, pretty standard. What I did want to do really quick before we jump into the player pool and projections, we differ a little bit in our projections versus let's see. I think mine are loaded. They got reset. Let me load them while we talk through it. They were loaded this morning. Let me see if FanDuel's loaded. I don't think so. All right, let me load those while we talk through it. And I'll jump back over here. So I'm going to try to go multitask just a minute. So bear with me. They're loaded over here. And then I definitely want to look at the distributions to compare. So one of the fun things I like to do is, especially with 1 year, it's pretty easy to go back to last year's event and just see. This was the Black Desert Championship, just to see what players' stats stood out as they kind of came into this week. So again, somewhat comparing apples to apples in terms of like we're looking at data from the last couple months. If we go back in time to last year, we're looking at the same time frame of data. What can we gather from Matt McCarty won? What stats can we look at that shows us the biggest correlation, which the leading correlations kind of help us guide our path. But you can also come in here and see, if we just sorted on the model, we get some miscuts in here. We get a T8, the winner, a lot of medium finishes, T46, whatever. So we can basically tailor this. And this is what I did on our podcast on Sunday night. So we run that. We'll do even distribution. And you can see here we got Nick Hardy, T8. He was 5th. Bo Hosser, 11. T11 was 7th. Ben Griffin, just before he really started to play well, T11 was 30th here. Matt McCarty was 14th. So let me load this again. Should be in there now. Let's see. Let's refresh this. Yep, that is correct. 94.1. McNeely. Just double check really quickly. And ownerships are in there. Yep, ownerships are good. Let's see. Anders Albertson's 47 points. Double check. Kind of alphabetical order. Anders. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. They are all in there. So still got my 2 builds. So perfect. We'll go to that next. But yeah, so really easy way to kind of look through this. Like the IQ stat's a pretty big one. We can jump that up to like 50%, 25. We'll even do just tee to green, 25. And this should be a pretty good look. Yeah, so you can see several top 11s, a couple T25s. You're going to get miscuts. This is part of PGA DFS. And then we can kind of jump forward to the current week. Same exact time frame. And look who's kind of popping a bit. Again, sample size is important. 4 rounds for Doc Redman. Now, Matt McCarty won last year with 4 rounds coming into this event. Maybe not a bad thing to obviously include Doc Redman. He's 6,500. Was playing decent on the Korn Ferry Tour as well. But Michael Thorbjornsen is the favorite. His odds have dropped to like 16-1 now. Pearson Coody, 8,600. Stephen Fisk won a couple weeks ago. Davis Thompson has been a pretty popular play for us and has popped in the Run the Sims. And he's popping today. I'm pretty sure we'll rerun it and look at it. Mac Meissner had a good week for us a couple weeks ago. So all in all, pretty good. Decent spread. I don't have a ton of really cheap guys that are popping outside of Doc Redman and Ben Coles. Everyone else is pretty much mid-priced, which is to be expected. So before we jump into that, I do want to pull up the distributions really quickly. So let me remove this. Let me do the bigger screen. And let's share that. Okay. So bear with me while that looks all weird. So if you recall from, was it 3 weeks ago, we were looking at the distributions for the top players. So for PGA DFS, we were looking at with the bimodal distributions and kind of what that looks like. So like a mean projection is on the tail end of basically the ceilings of what we're really looking for, because there's such a big spike for the most part for most players outside of Scotty Scheffler. You know, there's a decent chunk of miscuts and they're not going to score many. They're going to score 20 to 40 points. Then the ceiling, basically, whenever they make the cut, is between 60 and 150 points, we'll say. And most of those are going to be making the cut, finishing 20th. They're right here in the 80-point range. So you can kind of see that there. One thing I did not bring up in the last show, which I think is interesting, because we were talking through ways to hack an optimizer with getting, like, a mean projection is basically including all these, obviously. And when we talk about PGA DFS, we really want to know ceiling for when they make the cut, which the Sims will kind of incorporate. But we want to know, like, when we build lineups, we're looking for the players that are going to have these spike events, you know, close to 100 points, if not more, in like a top 5 finish, or at least making the cut and finishing, you know, scoring 80 to 100 points. You'll see as we go down into like the weaker players, their mean projection is actually in a spot where they would never, like, realistically would never score those points. So we'll say 50, you know, a 50-point mean projection is literally in a canyon where it's most likely they would never score 50 points. Like, it's unrealistic. They're either going to score 20 to 40 or they're going to make the cut and score, in some cases, 50, but basically 60 to 100. So like in in real terms, when you think about like NBA, the mean projection, they could score, 20 points or 15 points less or 20 points more. PGA DFS, we have mean projections that are realistically never going to actually occur. These guys are never going to score what their mean projection is. So it's an interesting concept. It's obviously further down, kind of middle of the field and on down, you'll see them really spike, and the mean projection moves to a spot where that's honestly not even a mean projection in terms of like they would never score that anyways. Like there's almost a 0% chance they could score their exact mean projection. So just jumping forward to an event like 2 weeks ago with no cut, you can see these projections look a little bit more normal. So I just wanted to highlight this. This is very similar to what showdown projections look like. There's a little more or a little less of the right skew, but you can see a big difference in like these mean projections actually are very accurate in terms of what their distributions are. Even as you go down into the worst players, you'll see their mean projection is basically it's really close to their median, which is nice to see. But did want to illustrate that. We might do some showdown content in the future, but just expect, this week we're going to have a cut, obviously, but wanted to point that out because we did not kind of close out that topic on distributions. But you can see this is much more normalized. They have 4 rounds. Everyone gets 4 rounds. It all kind of falls into the same exact distribution. Just some are shifted more right, some are shifted more left. But the mean is pretty indicative of what their actual mean outcome is going to be. So with that being said, let's kill the terrible screen share and let's jump into Run the Sims, and let's look at some builds, and I'll kind of explain what I did this week, my thought process. So there we go. All right. So I think the last show I did 3 or 4 builds. It's probably 4. And really the changes I make in the settings are updating the uniques, changing the max exposure, changing the randomness. I try to keep the salary range fairly high. Like you could honestly, most good lineups are going to be using up most of the salary. So we'll say like 49.4 plus, but I try to spread it out a little bit just to see if I can get something weird, at 48.5 or 48.8. But generally speaking, you could probably be pretty safe, 49,000 plus. For DraftKings, number of lineups, I ran 5,000 on the first one, then I just slid it back for 42.49. Uniques per lineup in the first one was 4. So if you think about that, it's just going to spread out the exposures across all the players. And then the randomness was a little bit higher for that as well. And then this one, I dropped the max exposure and the randomness. So let's just take a look really quickly at the top players we have in our projections. So Kurt Kitayama is at 9,600. We have him the highest on DraftKings at 94.1 points. Maverick McNeely, 10.5, 91.6. So there's a difference there between those two. Then we have Davis Thompson, Michael Jorgensen, who's going to be pretty popular. We have his ownership about 24%. Rico Hoey at 9,300 and Alex Norm. So you can see there we have some discrepancies in what DK's pricing was and what our projections show based on their field strokes gained over the last couple of months. See if there's any notable, any notable values. Michael Brennan, 6,900, pretty reasonable projection. Taylor Moore, Jesper Svensson, we've played a lot of. He's probably the best value up in that close to 8K range. Max McGreevy, Doug Gim, Yo Hisasuni, Isaiah Salinda, Thomas Rosenmuller, and on down the list. So I don't want to bore you with all those, but those are what I want to look at. As far as most popular players this week, Michael Thorbjornsen, Kurt Kitayama, Takumi Kanaya, which is really interesting, right around 20%. Again, that's very in line with what his projection or his value is. I don't know what his actual value was. He's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th in value. So again, value goes a lot, hand in hand with the ownership. So Takumi Kanaya is one of the more popular players, or cheap players, I should say, one of the more popular cheap players. And then it's pretty spread out. Is just in the teens, which is kind of borderline on really concerned with ownership or not, because we can miss. It happens, right? Like Davis Thompson, Maverick Neely, Alex Noren, we have right around the same. We'll call it 18%. Alex Noren's was slightly under that. It's very possible that one of those gets jammed a bit more and is over 20%, and one other guy, gets the brunt of that and moves down to 12 or 14%. But generally speaking, everybody in this 9K, 10K range is pretty evenly spread out. I mean, honestly, it's just basically an even split between most of these guys. Michael Brennan, 6,900. We talked about him with a pretty good projection or good value at his price. Yeah, pretty much it. Alex Smalley had a good event in Japan. Aldrich Potgeider, you would think that would be a pretty good golf course for him as far as he hits it and tends to spray it. This would be a good opportunity for him to find a lot more fairways and have some upside. Patrick Fishburne kind of in the same boat. So let's run with some of these builds and let's see what these sims are spitting out. So I'll quickly touch on the distributions because that matters a lot in terms of what these builds look like. Because I talked about this in the last show. Like if you move this randomness around, you're focused more on the projections, projection purity. I don't know how you want to phrase that. But obviously the less randomness you have, it's going to be tighter to the actual raw projection. There won't be much overlap using like the standard deviation, bypassing other similar players in that salary range. So randomness skewing that up to 40%, 30%, 20%, and getting some different distributions. You'll see between build 1 and build 2, McNeely, Noren, Jason Day are all my highest exposures. It's very spread out, which is kind of my purpose here. If you look at build 2, we get a lot higher concentration of Davis Thompson because I basically shrunk the randomness, so it's a little bit closer to what the true projections are spitting out for the optimizer. Davis Thompson, Kurt Kitayama, Alex Smalley, Rico Hoey, Pearson Cootie, all over 20%. You can see here, even with Thorbjornsen being one of the favorites, if not the favorite this week, he's still not really a super high exposure in either of these builds. He's sub 20% in both. So let's run the sims on this first one. We'll do large field. We'll let that run for a second and see what spits out. And I will say, while that's running, I pulled up the weather for Thursday and Friday. I know most people just want a quick cut and dry answer. I would say AM PM is probably the preferred wave, if we can even call it a preference. But we can look at Thursday. It's fantastic weather, a little bit cool in the morning, but you can see the wind is pretty much non-existent. We got sustained 5 in both AM and PM. Gusts a little bit higher in the PM, but not a big deal and not a huge difference. Gusts aren't over like 20 miles per hour, so not a big concern there. You could argue that the higher temperatures is beneficial, especially at elevation in Utah. And then if we look at Friday, it's about the same. So 6 miles per hour in the morning, gust up to 7, PM gust up to 7, sustained at 1 mile per hour. So dead calm. I would really view this as the same, both Thursday and Friday. Not a huge difference, but again, I know people like to lean into at least a preference, and I would say the reason why is it's less gusts Thursday AM. The cooler temperature might offset that, and then on Friday the PM has nearly no wind at all. So if we're splitting hairs, AM PM would be my go. Alrighty. So this looks like it finished. Just looking at the top lineups here on the left-hand side, we got Michael Thorbjornsen in the first, one. He's in the first one. He's not in any more in the top 10, which is interesting. Let's see. McNeely, a lot of really balanced builds. So using up the full salary, that's to be expected with the projections and simulations. Ownership's an interesting one to look at, especially on a full field. Around 50% is pretty good. If it's a smaller field, you could be 80%, maybe 90% and get away with it. But right around 50% is a pretty good number, and you can see most of those are grading out pretty well. Let's see any of the top guys that stand out. McNeely jumps up a lot over what we have exposure for. So you can see him here. 1, 2, 3. And what I'm looking at too, it's a really easy way to do this. In the Run the Sims optimizer, you can see my exposures in the build, and then the top 150 exposures. So Maverick McNeely, 21%. In the top 150, he bumps up to 29%. Same with Thorbjornsen, Alex Noren, Kurt Kitayama. The rest are pretty much in line, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. Like matching the field is not necessarily a strategy, but in PGA DFS, it's somewhat difficult to take huge stands outside of a guy like Scotty, who's 40 or 50% owned, and you just lock them in. You're just going all in, and you're trying to get the other 5 guys right. And honestly, it's probably worked out more times than not in the last 2 seasons. But generally speaking, like seeing all these guys kind of match the field ownership, we'll call it, not a shocker. So yeah, Maverick McNeely, Michael Thorbjornsen, Alex Noren, Kurt Kitayama are the 4 highest in terms of the Sims. And that kind of aligns with their projections being significantly higher than guys as they go out down into the 8K range. They're kind of in the high 88 points. So let's look at build 2. Again, Davis Thompson was much higher in this pool. Kurt Kitayama was much higher. Alex Smalley as well. So let's run a large field sim on that. Yeah, we could deep dive into like the randomness. Like I assume like Bezadenhout's pretty low. Matt Wallace is pretty low. I don't think Grillo was crazy low. Okay, so this honestly found an equilibrium a bit. Davis Thompson is a bit higher. I can't remember what his exact ownership was. So he was 17% in the pool when we ran it in build 1 and 30% in build 2. He stayed the same. In build 2, his Sims came down to 25%. Kurt Kitayama also 21% came down off the pool, but in line with what we had in build 1. Alex Smalley, Rico Hoey, Pearson Cootie, Thorbjornsen. So that's kind of where you could build. We could probably build one more and let it run. Let's see. Pull this down. Let's try to do like trying to think if I want something really concentrated or go crazy. Maybe we'll do 2 more. Let's do something concentrated. So we'll do max exposure, like 65%. I doubt we'll get half of that on anybody. Randomness, we'll keep it at 10. Uniques, we'll go down to 2. So it'll be a little bit more concentrated. Let's run that. And the point I want to make there is like when we go build to build, the goal for me is to try to get some different distributions of the players, different allocations, run the Sims and see which ones are continuously doing well in all of those lineups. Generally speaking, it's going to be guys, obviously, that project well. Those are typically the higher price guys. I'm more concerned with seeing, like the guys in the 8Ks, which are typically decision points that we have to make in the 7Ks. There's just such a difference in some of the projections. I'll do salary again. as you go down into like the 7K range, you'll start to see, 84 points for Jesper Svensson versus 67 points for Stefan Jaeger. And honestly, that's probably accurate, being a 20-point or a 15-point dog, 17-point dog. But like Stefan Jaeger wouldn't show up in anything. His ownership is 8%. That's probably still too high. I'd be really interested to find somebody like, Taylor Moore's 3%. That's probably worth looking into. Sam Ryder, kind of the same thing. Anybody where like the fantasy point projection and the gap in the ownership is kind of doesn't make sense. We'll let that finish running. Go back and look while that's going. Yeah, like Stefan Jaeger, second place here last year. Not playing great. So again, the projection honestly is probably fairly accurate in relation to Jesper Svensson. Look up Svensson. Yeah, much better. T16, T14, missed cut at the Wyndham, Sanderson T48. So let's see if that's still going. Yeah. We'll let that run for a second. Yeah, big fantasy point scores. This was the scoring last year on DraftKings. Matt McCarty, 154 points. So expect some low scores and a lot of birdies for sure. Let's see. Yeah, it's funny. You can see the drop off. I mean, it's like a real life distribution in what we see for the guys that made the cut. The worst, 56 points, 61 points, 65 points, and then the missed the cut immediately down to 37, 40, 34, 32, right in that 20 to 40 range. All right. Yeah, there's Doc Redmond. So again, I don't know what his projection is off the top of my head. 58.9 at 6,500. Let's see what that looks like down here. Pretty close to like the group around him. Again, there's huge spreads. Highsmith 59 and Nick Dunlap at 50. But yeah, Doc Redmond's probably pretty close. I don't know what our exposures were. Well, I'm going to look at that actually. It's worth playing a guy that's even coming off of one good week, and he's at, what was his ownership? 6,500. 3%. Wouldn't mind 1%, but 3%. So in this build, this was build 3 we just ran. Again, I bumped this up. I'll just look at it really quick just to recap. Bumped up the exposure to 65%. Randomness is pretty low, but 10%. I assume this is in percentages, but we'll call it 10% randomness. Pretty low. You think about, the guys in the middle with 75 points. They're talking about realistically a 7.5% or 7.5 point move down or up in each build. Uniques per lineup is 2, so a lot more concentrated on getting some overlap, just a lot more overlap. And you can see, Jesper Svensson has a huge projection edge in that range. So again, just trying to look at jump back to this. We just talked about, in the 7K range, Jesper Svensson at 84 points is 5 points on the low end, closer to 10 points for most guys around here. I mean, he's in line with guys that are 8,300, 8,500, 8,600. So that makes a lot of sense. Davis Thompson, good raw projection. Stephen Fisk, Smalley, Hoey. So let's run. Matt McCarty does jump up here. Let's see if Doc Redman's in here at all. Did I just see him? He's not. So you'd probably want to put him in on Doc Redman. Maybe match the field or match the projected ownership. Technically, it's the field. Let's run a large field again. And let's see how this spreads between like Kitayama. We run this raw with 2,000 lineups. We got him in almost 50%. Same with Jesper Svensson, Davis Thompson, Stephen Fisk. Let's just see if we can start to lean into a little bit of equilibrium with guys. I think they were around 21 to 23% in the last couple builds. There we go. Michael Brennan. Okay. Kurt Kitayama bumps up out of this pool. Kanaya bumps way up. Doug Gim bumps way up. Yeah, so I probably would not be super interested in going as heavy into those. I thought Brennan's ownership was higher. So he's at 35% in these exposures. Oh, ownership's right there, 16%. Not sure I would love that for sure. Just looking at the top lineups, I mean, a lot of the overlap with what we just saw. Davis Thompson, Jesper, Taylor Moore, Stephen Fisk again, Jesper, Davis Thompson, Taylor Moore. And you can see with 2 uniques, there's a lot of overlap in each lineup. So that would be a pretty easy way to do it. I'm curious why Brennan gets such a big bump. I mean, he's got a really strong value, so maybe that's why, to fit in the better projections up top, but I'm not a huge fan. I'd be much more, this would be the kind of allocations I'd be looking for, especially in a field like this. Davis Thompson, 25%, Kitayama, 21%, reasonable to the field projection. So very interesting. I think the first one I did was wide open. I'm just really curious if Doc Redman, there you go, kind of matched the field, right? He was 1% in our pool. And then he's up to 4%, we'll call it. And he said 3.5% for his projected ownership. So a big bump up there. So matching the field with Doc Redman and 4%, I wouldn't really hate going double that, especially in tournaments, obviously. See if anyone else stands out as like low owned. So just kind of looking down this. Stefan Jaeger, a little bit over the field. Luke Clanton again. Chan Kim has a big one. So Chan Kim is at 1.5%, and we have him 9% in this one. So let's go take a look at Chan Kim. He's a little bit more volatile off the tee, so that would probably help him here to try to make a case for him. But he hasn't been very good. T14 and miscut. Basically made the cut, DFL. So I'm not a huge fan of 9% Chan Kim. Again, the distributions probably make sense. I think 9 is still a little bit high for me. Let's see. Kevin Yu. I mean, honestly, hopefully a lot of these names are familiar. Jason Day. almost double the field. See if anyone just stands out as a huge bump. Couple here, Bryce Gardnett, Antoine Rosner as cheaper guys. That's pretty much it. You'll see some 1%ers down here at 5% exposure. Not a lot of lineups, but you're trying to mix and match as much as you can with those cheap guys that are going to miss the cut a lot. And then this was build 2. Let's see if he was in here. Yeah. So again, the randomness at a higher clip basically brought in those guys that are cheaper, where their spread of their projection could kind of overlap or surpass guys that are close to $1,000 more expensive. When I brought down the randomness, you're just getting way closer to the projections, which is or isn't a bad thing in terms of what kind of pool you're trying to build. Using the sims, I would probably want to be closer to build 1 with much more spread out, and then lean into how those lineups build or how those lineups compare against the other field lineups. Yeah, that last build is just kind of funky with Brennan, a huge bump. Probably good in EV opportunity. But 67% and 150 lines is a little bit rich for me. Jesper Svensson down here. He got the biggest drop. That's interesting. So Kurt Kitayama. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, if I want to put a cherry on top, it would be looking at these first 2 builds. We'll kind of throw out build 3 for now. I mean, Kitayama was in the first 2, Davis Thompson, Rico Hoey, Michael Thorbjornsen, Alex Smalley. All makes sense. The distributions I don't agree with. I wouldn't play this pool. Yeah, it could definitely work out. It would be very aggressive. And obviously with 2 uniques, it's going to be extremely concentrated. But looking at, going back through build 1 and build 2, you got Kitayama, Thompson, Thorbjornsen, Maverick McNeely. Build 1, McNeely, Thorbjornsen, Kitayama, Davis Thompson, Hoey, Noren. So that would be kind of like the builds I would start to focus on. Maybe building some lineups and pop in some min exposures on those guys and running against, a small field and seeing what that looks like. So the small field is an entry count of 444. And those are going to be, you'll realize those expected values obviously more often than the expected values in the large fields. And you'll see that in every sport. I mean, honestly, you could go run sims on like 500K to first NFL showdown, and there's some extremely high ROI lineups you can run. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast for those, is going kind of contrarian is probably not the right term, because some of those are you're just playing the right combinations, but you'll see huge ROIs there. And if I go run this on, a small field, probably try to rerun this on a small field, you'll see the EVs drop, but it's going to be much closer. So yeah, there you go. Already dropped from like 150 down to 100, 95, 89. And these are going to be, a smaller ROI standard deviation for sure. But even in this, you could see Maverick McNeely, Thorbjornsen, Kitayama all fall in line to the same broad exposures, we'll call it. So I think that's pretty much anything on the betting side. Outright's first round lead. We can take a look. Let's see. I'll run some quick tournament sims real quick. Let's see what kind of EV we can find. Typically, it's like mid-range, 30 to 1, 50 to 1. Don't do a lot of long bombs. Every now and then for fun, or it's all. I mean, anything at those long of an odds are kind of a lean and a throwaway ticket in a way. So let's see what we have here. So EV, you can go by win percentage. There we go. So like Matt McNeely's slightly less for us. Some big ones. Davis Thompson's pretty good. Alex Smalley, I'll kind of give a couple that I would play. So Jesper Svensson's a big one, a pretty good edge. And obviously we just saw in all the sims we ran, Jesper grades out really well for where he stands for DraftKings. And honestly, that aligns with what the DK odds are. So Jesper Svensson's a good one. I like him quite a bit. See if anybody else has some big ones. Taylor Moore has some EV, but man, I don't see him doing it on a birdie fest like this. Like I think in a vacuum or just from a DFS perspective, he's totally fine. I don't see him. This isn't his style of scoring, in my opinion. So like pretty good EV. I probably still wouldn't bet it. Yohisasuni, I'd probably bet it just for the sake of we got him winning double what his implied odds are. And that's probably as far as I would go. I'm sure there's a few that are decent down here that are worth, a throw in. Dylan Wu, maybe for like a finish position, is probably not a bad thing. But as far as like the favorites go, I mean, all these guys have a little bit of equity. Alex Smalley, Jesper Svensson, we just talked about. I do like Davis Thompson. So even with less EV in these sims, I would still bet Davis Thompson. I think he's maybe not a big step above this field, but he's definitely a pretty strong play, considering what this field consists of. So Davis Thompson, Alex Smalley, Jesper Svensson. And that's probably it. Yohisasuni. I mean, I might as well bet him. Yeah, Jesper, perfect. Sorry, jumping back between screens, so I'm catching your comments after I mentioned it. Norn to win, 22. Rico first round lead, 40. I have no issue with that. Rico is honestly, you would know where he stands for the entire event after round one anyway, so it's probably a pretty smart way to bet Rico Hoey. Man, he had one putter switch and he looked like he was going to go crazy like 3 weeks ago. At Procore T9, then he missed the cut of the Sanderson and he's back to T4 at Bay Current, which I think we talked about as a nice flop lag after the missed cut. T21 here last year, gained a bunch off the tee. Approach was slightly negative, no big deal. So yeah, Hoey's, again, probably not a bad bet outright anyways, but take the first round lead is probably the smarter way to do it, and you get better odds anyways. And like I said, you would know kind of where he stands after round one. Usually comes out fine. I think the missed cut he had, yeah, he shot 68 in round one, 77 in round two out of nowhere, and then comes back at the Bay Current, played really well to finish T4. So yeah, I like that. There you go. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the cooler temperatures I kind of mentioned as a potential, it's not. I wouldn't even argue that's a detriment, but like that's the only negative to the AM is the cooler temperatures. But obviously, you have pristine conditions all day, and in the morning, everything is pure. So get out early, calm weather, make a bunch of birdies. Where's Thursday? Right here. Good to go. Appreciate that. Good questions. Let's see. I think that's it for now. everything else. Just curious. Let's see. Just gonna run like a first round 3-ball just to see how like Davis Thompson, Hoey, and I'll say McNeely grade out. Really close. So honestly, as strong of a favorite as McNeely and Davis Thompson are, Rico Hoey's not that far behind for a single round. So pretty good. Just putting more into the point of Hoey's being a good bet for the first round lead. All right. I think that'll do it, guys. Yeah, we got, I think, 3 more events to round out the fall swing, have a little break. I'm probably not going to do anything for the Hero. And then we'll be back for the Sony, as we talked about to start the show off. The Century was canceled. So that is all she wrote. So again, check out runthesims.com. You can use code FGB to save 10% off. And obviously they're running hot for NFL season this currently middle of the season. So you can check that out as well. But best of luck for your PGA contests and your betting for the Bank of Utah Championship. And we'll see you again next week. See you guys.